Hey, Feisty listeners, Feisty founder and CEO Sarah Gross here. I am super excited to let you all know that our brand new suite of digital courses is officially live and on demand starting June 9th. And these courses are designed for one purpose: to give active women like you the tools, knowledge, and support you actually need to thrive. For far too long, women's health has been treated like an afterthought. But not here, not anymore. Whether you're dialing in your nutrition, building strength, navigating hormonal shifts, or just trying to stay sharp and feel like yourself, you'll find expert-led, science-backed courses built for real life and real bodies. And to celebrate this launch, you will get 25% off all courses through the end of June. Check them out now at livefeisty.com. The link will be in the show notes, because your health deserves more. Hello, Feisties. Welcome back to episode 2 in our IVF series. I think it's called the Ultra Marathon No One Signs Up For. Is that right, Jill?
Yeah.
I love that
mean, some
name.
people do sign up for it, but I think that if people could avoid it, they would.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So we have another episode coming up, to another interview coming up today that's quite different to the things you talked about with Carla. We're talking to Alexandra. What can we expect coming up?
Yeah, so Alexandra Stewart is a fertility therapist, and she focuses a lot on issues of fertility and pregnancy loss. And we really dive deeply into the emotional aspects of fertility and the processes associated with that. We dig into pregnancy loss and into just some of the ideas around the emotional side of trying to become pregnant and then, having difficulty with that, because that was one of the most, equally as difficult as the physical aspect of IVF was the emotional aspect of it. And I would highly recommend that anybody pursuing this do find a good therapist to walk hand in hand with you through this. I will also put out a trigger warning for people, because we do, of course, discuss pregnancy loss. And I know for myself, going through IVF and loss, I wish there had been more trigger warnings out there for me, so that I could choose to opt out if I needed to. So, you may not be in a place in your journey right now where you want to be discussing this stuff, so it might be something you save for later. But
Sure.
I will share a little bit more about my story, and we'll get into how to grapple with the emotional and often the spiritual side of pursuing IVF.
Yeah, I really appreciated this conversation a lot when I listened to it. And it's interesting because I think I went into this thinking I don't really have a relationship with infertility or IVF. But as you were talking, I was like, what do I mean? Of course I do, right? Yes. And like I myself was adopted. So my parents in a different era went through that. And I had not, until I was listening to you talk and then saying about adoption as an option and how expensive it is now. That was very interesting, because I hadn't thought, like in the 70s, like I got handed off as a baby in a parking lot, and signed some forms. That was it, So it's just thinking about that too, that how IVF was actually a cheaper option than adoption.
Yeah, very different processes today, a lot more restrictions. And, I think however people pursue their family is going to be the right option for them. But it does get complicated when we do have all these options, right? And, I think that, again, going into IVF, I would always look at people who would try, get pregnant and have a baby, and then they're just like they're just parenting. And I just would look at them with awe and be like, what must that be like to just like get pregnant and then just have a baby? And I was like, it is such a different experience for me. And it felt almost magical to see those people walk around. And many times, and I actually don't think I talked a lot about this in the episode, but there's so many deep feelings of resentment that come up. And like some of the thoughts that I would have, I would see people out with babies and think like, what? Them? Why do they get that? Right? And, it just really changes you into a different person. And I had to work very hard to crawl out of those deep feelings of resentment and jealousy and bitterness towards like a more of an accepting attitude, which I think helped in the long run. But it's so deeply complex, and everybody's journey is going to be different, and everybody's going to feel differently. But I think the commonality here is that the more we talk about our experiences, the more we let people know that, they aren't alone in this. I think it's helpful, because I did feel very alone. I did feel very isolated. I felt like my feelings, and I think many people go through this, like the depth of despair feels unique to you. So it can be very isolating. So I do hope if, there's only one person out there that feels seen and heard and cared for through this series, then it will have been worth it.
Yes, and I'm sure there will be. And then that's why we do a lot of the things that we do on the Women's Performance Podcast. And I think a lot of people are going to relate to this. And we all know that so many women and men and couples have these types of journeys. So thank you so much for this conversation in particular.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, feisty people. CEO Sarah Gross here. I want to tell you about my favorite product for muscle strength and recovery, which has also become a favorite amongst all of my friends at CrossFit, Prevenex's Muscle Health Plus. A few months ago, I started using it during my lifting sessions. We call it red juice at CrossFit, and it has helped my power, speed, and I've even put on some muscle mass, which has typically been really, really hard for me as an ex-endurance athlete. Muscle Health Plus contains creatine monohydrate, of course, but it also contains branched-chain amino acids and essential amino acids, plus some even more cutting-edge ingredients like HMB and estrogen, all of which are scientifically shown to increase muscle growth, recovery, and strength. So basically, it's a convenient, all-in-one formula that goes way beyond creatine alone. Unlike most supplement brands, Prevenex tests everything with pharmaceutical-grade precision, and they also offer a 100% money-back guarantee. Try Muscle Health Plus today, and you can get 15% off your first order with the code PERFORMANCE at Prevenex.com. That's PERFORMANCE for 15% off at Prevenex.com.
Today I'm being joined by Alexandra Stewart, who works as a registered clinical counselor and is the co-owner of the group counseling practice Illuminate Counseling in North Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. She's a perinatal mental health certified practitioner and has over 10 years of experience in the area of reproductive mental health, including fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum challenges. Alexandra has also had her own experiences with fertility challenges, pregnancy loss, and fertility treatments, and is now the mother of 2 young children. So welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad we could connect today. I wanted to start off with just talking to you from one person to another on your own fertility challenges, and what your journey and what your story looked like, and how that fits into your practice today.
Yeah, happy to share. It was interesting because I started working in the field of reproductive mental health before I even went through my own fertility challenges. So even doing that work, nothing can really prepare you for actually going through it yourself. I think I'm sure it helped in some ways to help me understand what I was going through. But I was well into my practice, and my partner and I decided that we wanted to start trying for a family, kind of like the same old story, like you stop contraception, you're like, okay, it's going to happen soon, probably. Like, it might not, but I think, especially most people I've talked to, they think it's going to happen, I don't know, within a few months, that's the hope. That wasn't happening. And so I got some testing done. I think we had been trying for like 8 cycles or something like that. And I think, because I work in this field, I was like, okay, let's just get some testing done, see what's going on. It turns out I had diminished ovarian reserve. And so I think that was the first part of my journey where I was like, ooh, like a big blow, you don't expect that. So I had to process that. And then shortly after that, I found out I was pregnant. So I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about this. And then about 10 weeks into my pregnancy, I went for a second ultrasound. So I had my first stadium scan. The baby was measuring a bit small. I went for my second one, and we found out we had a miscarriage. So that was a huge piece of grief and trauma, I think, in my whole experience. Without getting into all the details, because, there's a lot of details, but I ended up having a surgical procedure where I had to have the pregnancy tissue removed. And then that didn't work fully. So it was like months afterwards of all this medical stuff happening. And then I was just hit by that deep grief that of course happens after a miscarriage. When we got the clear to go ahead and try, then we did. And we tried on our own for a while. And because of my diminished ovarian reserve, and because we wanted to have more than one child, ideally, we actually decided to start going through the fertility treatment route. Try to see if we can get some embryos. And I, again, working in this field, I knew that time is of the essence, especially when you have diminished ovarian reserve. So I connected with a local clinic here, Olive Fertility Center, and we did IVF. And again, there were some bumps along the way. Unexpected things happened, but we were really fortunate to get pregnant on our first transfer.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Because I had convinced myself that it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
Just, when you've had some pitfalls along the way, it changes things, right? You get really self-protective. So, and so I have a 3-year-old son from that transfer. And then unexpectedly, we were gearing up to do another transfer when we were ready to start trying for our second. And then I was, again, super fortunate to get pregnant on my own with my second. So that, again, unexpected, but very welcome. So that in a nutshell is my fertility journey. It's, I think, relatively to what I've been exposed to, it's, grief and trauma tossed in throughout there, but I feel relatively lucky that I had the outcome that I did. And it didn't go on for like 5 years of, being in the fertility treatment. Like I know it can for some people. So
definitely.
So that's me in a nutshell. My fertility
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, we have some similar experiences there. I had a miscarriage, and we found out at, I think it was 14 weeks. And, and that, it's been an interesting journey, and, I want to sort of get into some of this stuff, but, I think let's start at the beginning with the idea of just coming to accept the need to pursue IVF, because I think, and I talked about this with another guest, is that when we go into IVF, I think a lot of people think of it as this sort of miracle medical procedure, right? And it's like, well, this didn't work, so IVF will. And I think that's one of the things that I'd love to clear up for most people, is that it's a bit of a crapshoot. And it doesn't work out for everyone. I actually was one of those people that was in fertility treatments for 6 years.
6 years. Wow.
Yeah, 6 years, 11 transfers.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's been, I've like had, I don't know if it's like, it's given me like a depth of experience in terms of like, the different types of procedures that are tried and the different types of pregnancy that you can experience and the different types of loss and the different types of disappointment. And so I've got a pretty like strong resume when it comes to infertility. But can you talk to me a little bit about how when you are speaking to somebody who is coming to terms with either having to pursue IVF and maybe more on the range of people who are needing to use donation mechanisms, so either a sperm donor or an egg donation. And I know that this can be part of people's journey as well. So both of those things, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's definitely commonalities in what I've seen in working with people where there's the initial resistance as you come into this process of okay, we need to take the next step, which is IVF, for just fertility treatments in general. I do see mixed responses though. Like you said, for some people it's this, okay, well we're going to do IVF and it's going to work, right? Like it's kind of like almost a sense of relief too, that, okay, I don't have to go in this alone anymore. I have this team of specialists and doctors who are going to help support me now towards my goal. And there is that societal thing around it's IVF is the plan B and plan B works, right? Because there's just not a lot of knowledge around that about what it actually looks like. So yeah, I'd say some initial relief. I've also worked with some people where there's a lot of resistance towards actually the acceptance around, okay, I think we need to consider this as an option. So I've seen both. And I think I'll kind of maybe speak a bit more to what I see more often, which is that sense of relief when they finally get into the referral process, because there's long waits, of course. And you have a doctor who's like, okay, I think, this is our plan moving forward. And then you start, and like you said, it doesn't always go according to plan. Like for some people, it can be pretty straightforward. And that's great. It's kind of like they're in, they're out in the fertility clinic in a relatively short time, if you want to call it that. And then for some people, they're in it for the long haul, and they're in it quite a long time, and they become like an expert at fertility treatments. So that initial process, I'd say, differs for everybody, and then once you're in it, it just gets complicated, depending on what you've endured and what you've experienced. Because there's a lot of grief. Have you found that in the process?
Yeah, I think like it's this very continual process of grieving. For me, it started with, and I spoke about this on another episode, but like I knew I had a problem. I was also starting when I was 36. So I already knew I had a problem. I also had low ovarian reserves, very low AMH, which just essentially determines the health and age of your eggs. Basically, they just told me that I had shitty old eggs and I'm going to have to like figure something out. And I tried with my own eggs twice and once with my sister's eggs, which was also a very fraught experience. It's for me, it started when I was told that I would likely not be able to have my own biological children.
That's hard.
And there was a couple emotions there. One was the disappointment of like not being able to do this, through my own, with my own genes. And then the other was like kind of like being like, this shouldn't matter that much. And like being like, hey, like, not that doesn't matter. So I remember specifically the day that I was told that, and we went through a lot of different processes because, there's a lot of financial consideration when you're doing something like egg donation, because if you know the person, it needs to be a pretty specific personality And then if you don't know the person, it's very strange. And I did do this where I was sent to a website and I was scrolling through people's profiles and being like, could she be the person that, like, do I want to look at this face? Like, it was just like the weirdest.
Yeah.
And then you're like mixed up with grief and trying to process this. But as you said, time is of the essence. And like, I think this is something that I really didn't understand going into IVF, is that time is the enemy. And, you know, we operate on cycles and we operate on body readiness. And in between those times, there's often, as it was for my case, a lot of medical trauma. So a lot of like scraping out of uteruses and blowing out fallopian tubes and letting the body heal from that in order to like prepare the body for it. And, you know, waiting for hormones to work and, you know, just all of this stuff that like you're so ill prepared for. And
The waiting is hard.
yeah, and it really grinds you down. And I think there's like, I think people can understand the grief associated with a miscarriage and pregnancy loss. But there's this more abstract idea around time will be your enemy, hope will be your enemy, doubt and like immense feelings of failing as like a woman, as a person who you've been told your whole life you're supposed to reproduce. And so I, you know, went through, and I again had like a lot of experience coming to understand these different sort of textures of grief, and you know, still grapple a lot with that. But the idea of time for me was challenging because I gave birth to my second at 42. And, you know, time does run out for us. So
There are biological realities, right?
yes,
that we're
there
faced with.
are. But yeah, so I really like, I think for me, when I started to understand that we need to go into IVF, I was excited, right? I was like, great, this is something that's going to work for me. And then when I was just told like, no, like the essential components that we need to make this work just aren't there for you, that's so scary, right? And the idea of like going into adoption was always on the table for us.
Right.
And we'd actually started that process of going through into adoption. And then we just had this wonderful person walk into our lives. We knew her. She was sort of tangential to our lives and knew that we were struggling with fertility, and had a daughter of her own. She was 27. And she stepped up and said, I want to do this for you. And
Wow.
it was funny because I'd had a few friends be like, no, I'll do it for you. It's fine. But like they were my age. So I was like, like maybe not.
I don't want your eggs.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for the offer. But it wasn't even just that. It was like, because then you ask the questions, right? And you might know this, and I don't know if you do this type of counseling, is like when you have an egg donor, they're required to go through a therapy session to really understand that this is a good match. And so I had done that with my sister. And funnily enough, the therapist was like, your sister is not a good match. Didn't have kids of her own, and just didn't have like a really clear concept of like how this was going to like shake
What
out.
was involved? Yeah.
We actually did end up using her egg
Oh, okay.
after, and that's a more complicated story.
Yeah.
But we had this woman come to us, and you know, it was a perfect fit for us because we didn't know her too well, but she was very, you know, just sort of like, I'm here, I'm gonna do this.
That's incredibly generous.
Yes, yeah, and she turned out to be, I'll never forget it. My doctor called when she did the retrieval, and he's like, well, we have a little Easter bunny on our hands. And I was like, okay, maybe don't use that word. But she produced 38 eggs.
Wow.
Which is,
Okay.
they're like, we've never seen this before. This is crazy. And we ended up fertilizing 18 embryos. And so it was that was so great. And, you know, we do see her, and she does see our kids, and I watch her interact, and she will come up and be like, oh, hey, cool. And then just be fine with it. And I'm like, I would not be okay with this. I would be like, this is crazy. These are my kids. So we're so grateful for that. But
Good.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about this idea of hope. It's a concept that I have struggled with deeply. And I think is one of the things that makes this process so challenging. Can you speak on that a little bit?
This comes up pretty much with every person I work with going through fertility treatments. Is it's like hope starts to become the enemy. You know, they feel, almost hateful towards the hope, but you still have it, right? There always needs to be a sliver of hope. Otherwise you wouldn't keep doing this and putting yourself through this process. Because I think once you get into it, looking from an outsider looking in would be like, why would you put your body through that? And why would you put yourself through that emotionally, especially when it's been going on for a long time? So the hope is what keeps you going. And the hope it's the dream, right? It's the future that you've envisioned. And it's a complicated relationship, like you said. There's this thing that we do in therapy. It's an approach. It's called parts work. And so sometimes we think of the hope as a separate entity, like it's a separate part of you, but it's just a part. And there's all these other parts that show up throughout this process that, there's the bitter, resentful part of you too, right? The part that's like, why is this hard for me? And it's so easy for everybody else.
Yeah.
And there's another part that's just exhausted, right? Like they're just like, I am in survival mode and, I'm ready to give up, which competes with the hopeful part, because the hopeful part is like, come on, you guys, like, let's rally. Like this is gonna work this time. So sometimes it can be helpful to think about it in that way for some people as they're in it. It's just a part of you. But yeah, the hope is a tricky one. Like what would you say your experience was with the hope through it?
I really experienced deep feelings of resentment and bitterness and anger towards the hope. It felt like this quite an insidious part of me. And I've often spoken about infertility as it's a form of insanity. And you do get into this cycle of, trying the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And I really did at times drive myself insane. I mean, I really, particularly on our second tries, after we got pregnant on the first try with our egg donor's egg. And so when we went back in, when my son was just over 1, and we got pregnant, we had a misfire, and then we got pregnant on the second round. And I remember being like, we did it. Like the numbers came back great. Everything felt good. And like, it was just like, I just was oblivious, right? And what I didn't see barreling behind me was going to be this really horrific miscarriage. And I remember just being like so optimistic and so hopeful. And I started showing really early. And my cousin and his wife, we were like literally a week apart with our pregnancies. And it was like just so exciting. And I just remember it felt like getting hit in the face with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
And that made me so angry and so bitter towards all these processes. And how could I have taken for granted, this thing? And why did I dare think that I would get away with something that was simple and easy? And I really struggled with the idea of what do I deserve? And this is like a concept that I really grapple with, is like, is there a point where I suffer enough that I earn myself a baby?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I drove myself to complete exhaustion, and I was extremely isolated, and I am the type of person who will push through, and I always push through, and it almost felt like mechanical towards the end, where it was like, didn't work, go again, miscarried, go again, go again until we're out of embryos. Like couldn't leave eggs on the table. And then I heard this, there's a great podcast, and if people are interested in learning more about some of these nuances of infertility, there's a really wonderful podcast that came out through the New York Times called The Retrievals. And that was a very impactful story, and it has some other themes associated with it. But something that was said in that story really resonated with me, which is like, why do women, or why do people put themselves through the immense pain, the physical pain, the mental torture, the extreme exhaustion? Why do people do this in order to get to this place of, I have my children? And you said something earlier that really, emphasizes this point, which is, we're already mothers. We are fighting for our children right now. We have already come to grips with what these children will be, and what they will look like, and what our lives will look like, and the love and the joy that will be afforded. And then my only job is to get them. I have to get them, right? And I have to save them. And, that is where I found these deep reserves of, I don't even know if I would call it resilience, because that feels like too much of a shiny word to apply to it. It was just like, parents will walk through hell for their children, and whether or not you have them in your arms doesn't mean you wouldn't do that anyways, right? And
Right. Your journey just started a little earlier in terms
that's
of that
right.
than
Yeah.
some people.
Yeah. And that really helps me make sense of why we do what we do, and how we get through it. And that is not to say at all that people that choose to exit their fertility journey wouldn't do that for their children. And, it's just that was my experience, and that really, really resonated with me.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think that there is such a, I always admired people who were willing to exit and say,
It's because that is not easy.
I lost hope towards the end, and I was just moving through things because I was like, I am not leaving eggs out
Yeah.
there.
11 transfers is no joke, right? Like that's
No, it's
a
pretty,
lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is a lot. And, I, that year was incredibly difficult, and, I barely had time to mourn, the baby that we lost. And, and it was kind of during the pandemic, and it was something that I had to endure by myself, which was also very, very challenging. And when I went into the hospital to have what they call a DNC, which is to remove that the tissue, being in that room they have other people who are scheduled for their own either DNCs and sometimes abortions. And I remember sitting across from a really young girl, probably like a teenager, and her mom, and they had this like demeanor of like relief and joy about them that told me that they were there to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. And I was sitting directly across from them, and I was so grief-stricken, and I kept on watching it, and I just couldn't keep it together, and I just had to ask them, I'm like, I need you to close like my curtains, and I need to get this done soon.
Just like rubbing it in your face, right? Like
yeah. And like, they didn't know. And
No.
It's like, fine. Like, of course, like if, that's what is needed, then go ahead. But yeah, I think that a lot of the unseen trauma that comes with the road to finally conceiving is very fraught. And I think often when people walk that road of fertility long enough, the trauma kind of blends all into itself, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, and then that happened. And you're like, oh my God, and that happened. And you're like, oh yeah, I had this shitty doctor. And like, oh yeah, somebody said something to me that was like super hurtful. And like, you know, it's just like, it's this compounding factor. And at the end, I was just like a shell of a person. So
of course, yeah, it's a marathon. And
it
then,
is.
and then if you have your desired outcome, which is a live baby at the end, now you have to deal with a baby, right? And all that comes with that. So you know what's interesting, Jill, is sometimes we won't even see people in our therapy practice until like 6 months, a year, like however, like a lot of time has passed because you're just in survival mode for so long.
Yeah.
And then finally you have a moment to breathe and you're just like, what did I just go through? Like what just happened to me for the last few years? And you just don't have the ability, you process and digest it a little bit in the moment, but there's also this aftershock that can happen for people where it's a lot to process.
Yeah, it is. I'd like to shift now to how to cope in a relationship while going through this. I'm sure you see a lot of this coming through your practice, but I know that IVF can put a strain on relationships and infertility because it's typically happening to one person in the relationship, and the other person sort of has to carry that load. Can you talk a little bit about like what you see between partners and couples, what some of those outcomes are, and how people try to cope with that during their IVF process?
We refer to it as the pressure cooker because, you know, like we all go through challenging times in a relationship, especially a long-term relationship. And going through fertility challenges and or loss is going to be one of those roadblocks in your relationship. I think for most people, some people, it brings them closer together in many ways, and that's great. And yet there probably is still going to be some roadblocks within that experience. So we call it the pressure cooker. There's financial stress. There's communication stress. There's treatment burden, which you were talking about. So typically one person experiences the burden and the invasiveness of all the treatment. So it can feel like a sense of inequity. There can be sometimes familial pressures. There's, it also can highlight and magnify existing relationship stressors that were there. Kind of like having a child with somebody too,
Right.
is it just can kind of magnify issues that were already there in the relationship. And so it's a lot of stress. And for some couples, as they navigate through this, it forces them to communicate in a way that perhaps they haven't had to before, especially if this is their first major obstacle in their relationship. For some people it can become really contentious. Some people, they feel like they kind of just drift apart. So I think the impacts and what that looks like can vary, but in terms of what can be helpful for couples is, and we hear this so much with any kind of challenge within a relationship, is the communication piece. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take a step back. Actually, even before that, I think is for a couple to understand what they're going through, like normalizing how hard this is, and that it's not just you as a couple who maybe you feel like you're kind of failing if you're not getting along, or if there's lots of fights or whatever. Like it's more so normalizing that this is hard for everybody who is going through something similar to you. And that can feel, I think, just really validating, almost relieving for a lot of couples, because some people do think, oh, we're having stressors and we're having fights and arguments, or we're feeling so distant now, like how maybe we're not meant to be parents together. That comes up a lot. So I think just a couple understanding and normalizing how this actually impacts people going through it can go a long way. At least that's what we do when they come see us in our office. And then the communication piece is huge. Just starting from the really basic elements of how are you doing? Checking in. How is this actually impacting you? Because like you said, we're in it. It almost can become robotic, operational. That we don't always slow down and pause to say, how am I actually doing? How's this impacting me? And you need to do that for both people, right? Because even for the person who has the treatment burden on them, the other partner is having an experience too of some kind. So that's huge. Whether you can do that on your own, great. If not, then you get someone to help you. So maybe it is a therapist just to have like a checkpoint where you can just touch base, have the time to actually slow down and check in with each other. That can go a long way too, right? It's just getting some insight into the other person's world. How are they being impacted by this? And so you feel like you're not so alone in it, because that is something that we hear a lot. And I know you mentioned you were feeling alone in it as well. There's also, different things people will do, like taking a fertility break. And that, there's probably a lot of emotion behind that when you hear that. But that can look so many different ways. That might mean that, for the next week, we're just not talking about anything related to fertility treatments. You can still be going through the motions, but we're just not going to make that the bulk of our conversation. Little strategies like that sometimes can help just get you through the marathon of it. So I don't know, is that sort of answering what you were...
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm always just interested, like we survived. We're still married.
Good. Glad to hear that.
And like we had, it wasn't like until that we were a little bit deeper in it. And I think that we sort of moved in lockstep for a lot of this stuff. And, because we both had the same goals. And I think also like expectation setting with a partner, it can be really helpful. We had been given the advice, like, pick the number of transfers you're willing to walk together in. And I think that was really helpful for us, because we just knew that we had both signed up for that. Now, there was a period of time where my husband was like, listen, I don't want to keep doing this, and I want a baby as much as you do. And he was kind of like, I'm going to support you, because it kind of sounds like you're going to do this no matter what. But just know that I'm stepping out of the hope, and I'm going to move into acceptance that we are not having a second child. And I was like, okay, like, great. I am just like, I'm going to go do this thing. And like, he was great. And like, we certainly had our moments, and we did seek counseling for that. But you're right about the communication piece, where he was able to say, like, I can't be in this mentally and emotionally with you anymore. I don't have capacity. This is my limit, but I'm going to be here for you as much as I can be. And like, it like,
great self-awareness, great communication.
Yeah. And then, I think he certainly struggled with the pain that I was going through in this sort of like repetition of going through cycles. And
that comes up a lot, right? Seeing your partner hurting so much.
Yeah. And just because I would push through so many different procedures, and, I think that there's, I'm sure many women have experienced this, is that a lot of procedures that are related to any type of reproductive help often don't come with the right amount of anesthetic. So there's a lot of like physical pain, and like just being very shocked at how bad things are going. And so he also trying to keep him informed on like what's happening with my body, like, and I mean, sex is such an interesting topic with IVF and just like trying to have a baby. Because like we tried for quite a while alone, and man, like it sucked.
It's not sexy anymore.
No, I remember I went out and got like some like lingerie and stuff, and I was like,
Good for
well,
you.
here I am. And he was just like, yeah, like, let's go again. Like, what's your temperature? Like, what time is it? Like,
Yeah, pants off, let's go.
yeah. It was like, it really challenges. And then when you're in cycles as well, and you're in a constant state of either being pregnant or losing a pregnancy, or you're on hormones that have made you like extremely bloated and irritable. And like, I mean, it's just, it wrecks everything. It really wrecks everything. And like, so, you know, I think the deeper we got into IVF, the less of a chance we were going to have any type of surprise pregnancy, which, you know, you hear a lot about is people do IVF and then they get like, you know, pregnant on the side. And so we went through such a period of like we just weren't having sex. And because like, it was just like, I was solely focused on, you know, I was running a business at that point and I was trying to exit the business. So it was just like a very stressful period. So I'm grappling with like trying to run this business down and get it sold, and then also trying to do IVF. And it was just like, we're all coming out of the pandemic and we've got supply chain stuff. And it's just like, it was such a fraught time for us. But, you know, I will say this, I mean, for me, at least, I really enjoyed my pregnancies, and we were able to enjoy that. I actually just like did not pay attention to the pregnancy until it was so obvious. I think I was like 6 months pregnant before I was even like confirming I was pregnant.
Yeah. I think a lot of women
like, going to lose this at any second, right?
Yeah,
so, but yeah, and I think that there's like this, you know, I've been so lucky in my relationship, and part of my story is like both my husband and I have been in recovery from addiction for 15 years. So we have a pretty like solid foundation for language and communication. And I think that has really helped us through, is that we have really good support systems, and we have like foundational knowledge of like open and caring communication. And
you've already been through some big stuff.
We've been through the gauntlet before. So. But I think that, you know, the coming back together in terms of like a relationship has been really great for us. You know, we're out of having kids, and the kids are sort of, I'm not in the newborn phase anymore, and he got a vasectomy, and I of course hit perimenopause like almost exactly 2 years after I gave birth to Louisa.
You don't get a break.
Aces. But we've been so lucky to like have this really, like, we've come back together in terms of our sex life in a way that like we just never experienced before, because all of the pressure is off. Like, we got married, we were able to travel and do that stuff, and then we went straight into this. Like, we were married for like a while before we went into this, but then it was just this like period of time. It's like 6 years, and now all the pressure is off. And
Jill, I think it's so important that you bring that up, because it is sort of one of those topics that people feel like sometimes can be a bit taboo, or maybe it's like not the most important thing to talk about right now as you're in it. But if you think about it, it makes perfect sense that intimacy is on the back burner during that time, because if you think about it from a nervous system perspective, you are in survival mode, you are in fight or flight mode. And to be able to slow down and connect and be intimate with your partner, that requires your nervous system to that protective part of our nervous system to take a step back a little bit, right? To feel safe enough to slow down, to then turn and be present and connect with our partner in a specific way. So you're like, now that the pressure is off and our family is complete, and you know, you can get to that place again where intimacy in the way that you desire it is possible. And sometimes we will say to couples, you know, intimacy when you're going through this period, it's going to shift. You know, finding other ways to connect with your person finding other ways to create even just a little bit of intimacy is probably more realistic. So taking the pressure off, and that might mean you sit on the couch together at the end of the day, and you're touching, your bodies are touching, and you're watching a show together, because that might be all the capacity that you have. So kind of, like reworking what intimacy looks like during that time is probably just more realistic, because you don't want to put more pressure on anything during that time.
And I think it's like important to acknowledge too, is like any partnership that goes through this, like your relationship will change. Like you will undergo changes. Like it's not, I mean, you would probably do it anyways, but this is like, you know, I've met people who are like, we did 2 rounds and we divorced. We were done. And like, but for them it was positive, right? Because they were just like, hey, we didn't do well in this situation together.
It's the trial, right? For being a parent.
It is. And I think like I wish more people understood, like, and I think it's so tough. And, you know, I think I've been hammering this home a bit, is just like the breadth of the emotional and physical commitments that IVF and solving infertility requires is so deep. And it's so hard to get your arms around before you walk into it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's important that people know is like, you are going to walk into some pretty like abrupt walls. Like it doesn't matter. You'll think that you've got it dialed, and then it's going to be like this whole other thing. Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, having come out of this and not quite, you know, going into it and just thinking, it's so hard to recognize when you're in it. Is that like your relationship with your physical body and your mental self is so deeply impacted. And, you know, I'm always so, like, I love when I hear people are like, we did 1 round and it worked. And I'm just like, it's so nice to hear, right? Because I just know that can be such a relief. But
is there still a part of you, though, that feels another way to, like, that, you know, that part of you, that bitter or resentful part? Is she still there?
No. And, you know, this is what I will say, and this is just my experience, is like, when you hold your baby, it wipes the slate clean. It wiped the slate clean for me. And I'm grateful for the trials that I went through. I'm grateful that I can share my story with people and be like, you know, yes, it's hard. And yes, these are the things that you need to look out for. But like, and whenever you want to get off the merry-go-round, you go ahead and get off, right? Everybody needs to do what's right for themselves. But because of my like deep experience with this, I'm able to offer some guidance and some insight into what treating infertility really looks and feels like. Because I think that was like, I kind of feel like I want to shout it from the rooftops, is like, it is never going to go the way you think it's going to go. And it's like this great mystery. And it is, you know, I often really struggled with this idea of, you know, the success rates at clinics, right? And in our other episode, we talked to an IVF doctor, and she was, you know, said that these success rates do matter. But I was kind of always like, right, but isn't it just like, you guys are kind of all doing the same treatments? And also, you know, there's like a lot of it depends on the condition of the woman's body at the moment of transfer. And so I feel like there's just so many unknowns at work here. And there are certainly like really fantastic fertility clinics that do have great success rates. And I would highly suggest people pursue that for your best chances. But I want people to understand that there is like, be prepared for some of the surprises along the way. You know, I have like such a deep gratitude. We had one nurse at our fertility clinic here in Victoria, Larissa, and I would not have gotten through this without her. She just had this wonderful and caring demeanor, and it only takes one practitioner. It doesn't have to be the doctor, because God knows I had a few
How
doctors.
often do you even see them or talk to them, right?
Yeah, I did have one really magnificent doctor, just, you know, it was a doctor actually at Olive. He was at a different practice before, but had a real ability to hold space and grieve with patients, which I found really deeply touching.
Yeah.
And on the other end, I had a doctor that was at the same practice that was like, "Yep, so yeah, this pregnancy's not going to work out. Like, you got to go get some pills for it, and I'll see you later. And I'm just going to leave you naked on this table." You're like,
Great.
can I just weep in here for like an hour before I leave? So, like, I think there's, it runs the gamut, and like sometimes you want somebody that's very clinical and is going to get direct to the point, and sometimes you want somebody who's going to be emotionally attached to your process, and it just depends on who you are. But I think I am forever grateful. We are now elder parents of young children. My husband is 50 this year, and we basically like work out just to like keep up with these kids. But yeah, we're grateful all the time for it, and I have no regrets on my process at all. I do wish it had been easier, but if it had been easier, I would not have the incredible kids that I have now, and they are who they are, and
you are who you are now because of it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's important. That deep transformational change that happens for so many people going through this, and it's hard when you're in it because you don't know what the outcome is going to be and where you're going to land, and then when you're out of it, it's there can be a deep appreciation and gratitude for like, that was really hard, and I learned some things. I learned about myself, I learned about the world, I learned, like you said, things don't always go according to plan, and in the fertility realm, that's kind of the motto. You can't guarantee really anything.
And I do want to take a minute to like honor any person that's listening to this that, did not continue their journey and, got off the merry-go-round and decided to live their life without children. And how difficult that can be. And that takes its own type of resolve and strength. And, I remember, and I had mentioned this on another episode, but, anytime that, I'd be on all these chat forums and all this sort of stuff, and everybody's going through these fertility problems, and then somebody would be like, "Oh, I got pregnant." I was like, immediately like, "I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you in here
You're
anymore.
out of the club.
You're out of the club. Get out of here." Right? So I completely understand that, right? And I like, nope, zip it, get out, you're done, you got pregnant. So, I do so feel for and also admire the resolve of the people that continue and, continue their lives without pursuing children, and how deeply, wounding that can be as well. So,
yeah, you have to do a lot of deep work in this process. Yeah, whatever the outcome is, it forces you to kind of look at your shit.
Oh
so
my gosh,
speak.
yes. Yeah. If you can make it through the other side, you will know yourself deeply. So
you will. Yeah. And a lot of grief work either way, right? And so for those people who are choosing to not further pursue treatments or trying to get pregnant, it's get some support, whatever that looks like, because there's a lot of emotions and a lot of grief to process there.
There is, And if you're in the Vancouver area, definitely look up Alexandra at Illuminate. And it sounds like you'll be able to give them a hand with some of that stuff.
I'd love to. Yeah, we've got a great team too. A lot of a team of people who kind of walked through not similar journeys, walked through the journey to some degree, so they kind of get it on a personal and a clinical level.
Amazing. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there. This was such an amazing chat with you, and I'm just really grateful we were able to connect. And again, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, I appreciate it.